Hello, my name is Lee Davey. I'm not an alcoholic and I refuse to be anonymous today. My guest is Rosalyn Dischiavo. I love that. It just kind of rolls off your tongue, right? Dischiavo. I mean, if I had a surname like that, I would probably get into the sensuality kind of like, business. Probably said
Well,
that wrong.
I think it sounds better in Italian, actually. It's Dischiavo.
You do it.
Dischiavo.
Much better.
Everything sounds better in Italian. Let's be frank.
Very true. Very true. I've been reading The Lost Art of True Receiving the last couple of days. Been thinking to myself, well, I don't struggle with that. I'm always saying to my wife, do this to me, do that to me, massage me, this and that. And but I learned a great deal. It's a great book. I love it.
Thank you so much.
I read a lot, Rosalyn, and I find myself just picking up books, reading the first chapter, getting on to the next one, because I don't know, they're just not doing it for me these days. But that one really did. So, well done for jangling my jangles. It worked for me.
Well, I'm honored. Thank you.
Let's start from the beginning. You talked in there. We didn't talk in there, but I read on your website that you have a background in addiction. Where did that start from?
So, wow, very young. So one of my very first real jobs, if you will, was in addiction. So I started working with troubled youth, a lot of whom had problems with addiction. And then by the time I was 20, I was actually doing drug and alcohol counseling. And then eventually went on to get all my, credentials, further credentialing in that. So I became a certified drug and alcohol counselor. I was the youngest person ever to be certified in my state at the time. And then licensed eventually, became a marriage and family therapist. And now I'm a sexologist. I have a doctoral degree in human sexuality. So that's kind of been my journey. And a lot of it really started with the addiction thing because I was not just interested in treating addiction. Mm. I was always more interested, quite frankly, in helping to prevent it or to reduce the harm from it. Because I myself, could have gotten a lot worse, but I learned a lot about addiction in my teens. And so I quit drinking when I was 16. And I watched, a bunch of teenagers around me do that at the time. And then I watched people who didn't, and I always felt that we were far ahead, even though we'd had problems to begin with, we were pretty far ahead because we had all of this, we were paying attention to ourselves, other people were thinking about who's going out with who, and we were thinking about our resentments, how to get rid of them. So, it was kind of, it's a character building thing. And I don't know that there are too many things in the world today where we're really encouraging people in some kind of structured way to develop character. But, when you're in recovery, you have to be. Yeah,
it's a tough one. You can't rely on the educational system to do it. So I think the next best thing is you need to try to be encouraging that upon your kids yourself, or trying to do your best to help cultivate an environment where they feel that they can develop character. And I guess a lot of the times they're looking up at you, aren't they? And if you're lost with the fairies somewhere, drinking or drugging or whatever you're doing, then you don't have to be a nuclear physicist to figure out that they're eventually going to end up doing a similar type of thing, right?
Right.
So I think what you did there at 16 years of age would have been very, very difficult for somebody in my area to try to, where I grew up, to try to do that. Funny enough, you were more likely that the females would take that route than the males back then. And I see my son going through a similar kind of internal tug of war now. He's 17. He knows what his dad does for a living. He obviously sees his mum getting drunk as well and doesn't like that. So he doesn't want to drink, but as you'll say to me, well, I don't really want to give it up, Dad, because all my friends drink. So he's kind of like stuck in that way. It's very difficult. So all power to you. The lost art of true receiving. Talk a little bit about the importance of experiencing the joy of receiving and doing that without feelings of shame and guilt.
Yeah. So our societies, a lot of the Western world, not all of it, but a lot of the Western world really actively works against this concept, right? So we have a lot of messages that say it's better to give than to receive, as if it's possible to give without receiving. you know, or as if it's possible to receive without giving. I mean, you can take something from somebody, but that's not the same thing as receiving, you know. I really do separate them in my mind. I mean, taking is more like, I'm just going to grab this thing and I don't care what the consequences are. I don't care how it impacts you, you know. Receiving is literally when someone is offering something of any kind, right? It could be physical, it could be touch, it could be a compliment, it could be a gift, it could be a bit of their time, it could be their attention, and you just don't absorb it. You don't take it in. You just don't even notice it. And I actually think that addiction rests on a bed of not being able to receive, which in a way is counterintuitive, right? Because we all know how, quote, selfish addicts are, right? We know that, or we think we know, that addicts and alcoholics are extremely selfish people. And yet they are, but the reason that they are is because even when good things come their way, even when love comes their way, even when attention comes their way, even when forgiveness comes their way, they don't take it in. And you will hear people in meetings or people in recovery saying things like, well, I always felt alone in a crowd, right? Or, you know, people could tell me they love me, but I never believed them. You know, so it's there in the language. When you talk to recovering people, you hear them, or you'll say to them, you know, you're doing great. And they'll say, you know, and I believe that addicts and alcoholics have this in the extreme. I think that many, many, many people in Western culture have this. This is not just a phenomenon of people addicted to some kind of substance. And personally, I think that's part of the reason why at least American culture has become so addictive, right? Addicted to our phones, addicted to food, addicted to, you know, busyism, you know, work and just being busy all the time. You know, I have something to do. Well, a lot of that is because we don't know how to just sit back and go, isn't this nice? Let me just have a cup of tea. Let me, and you could say that that's mindfulness, but it doesn't really quite cut it, because mindfulness is being present, but receiving is a little bit of a different energy, right? So when I'm mindful, I notice. But when I'm receiving, I'm actively taking in. I'm actively absorbing, if you will. And in a healthy society, we would do that naturally. In a healthy society, that you wouldn't even think about it. It would be absurd to have this conversation. And there are probably people who are listening, you know, who might listen to this and say, I don't even understand this. What are you talking about? And I would submit that they're probably not American. Because I have never talked to an American who doesn't know what I'm talking about when I say this, you know? So I think
I would like to probe it a little bit, because I want to make sure that I'm getting it as well. Mm-hmm. So because people listening to this are going to be addicts of some description or other, they're going to be somewhere on that alcohol spectrum. And some of this will be, you know, tugging on some intuitive strings within their guts here. So what do you do to absorb receiving? How do you go from like, to me, like you say, you make a good point. I could be mindful right now. To me, mindfulness is just experiencing the moment, but absorb it. Like me and you are having a conversation, so I'm receiving your wisdom, which
okay,
yeah. So
and I'm receiving your attention and your focus,
right?
You know?
So let's focus on that a little bit. Like how does somebody flip the switch? What do they need to learn? What do they need to do to become absorbers, if you like?
Mm-hmm. Great. So I actually think it's a practice. It's not one thing that we do. There are multiple things that we can do. And I think if you take one thing and you do that for 5 minutes on a daily basis, it can have a profound effect. You know, I've studied meditation, I've studied Tantra and all of these things. And what I've learned from some of the teachers that I've had is one thing that you do every day is far more powerful than one big thing. One tiny thing you do every day, right? Is far more powerful than any big thing you do once in a while. So the thing that I did years ago, I had this realization when I was very young, and it's kind of an interesting story because we were sitting up all night. We were teenagers in recovery, and we were doing one of those all night things, and we were just sitting around talking. And because it got late, the sort of vulnerability broke down. And when you're really tired, it's like being a little drunk,
Right.
And people were like breaking down and telling secrets. And some of them were pretty heavy secrets, and, but mine, when it came out, was that I couldn't receive.
Right.
And I was hysterically crying, and it seemed like a weird secret, right? It wasn't being gay, which one kid said, and it wasn't, whatever other things were said that night. And it wasn't being abused by someone or being raped. But it was the thing that was wrong with me, right? And it took me years to realize that really was the key thing that I needed to work on, even though it came out that young. I was probably 17 years old at the time. So what I did was I started with, my name is Rosalyn. That means rose. Literally, it means fair rose. So I've always identified with roses. And what I did was I bought a greeting card that had a big open rose on it. And I put it next to my bed. So, here I am, I'm probably, I don't know how old, at this point I was probably 21 or something. And so I had like the bed on the floor, the mattress on the floor. And then I had a nightstand next to my bed that was way higher than my bed, right? So I taped this rose right on my nightstand so that when I woke up every morning and when I went to bed every night, it was literally right to my left, and I would wake up and I would look at it and there it was. And I meditated on that rose. And what I would do is I would just imagine myself opening like a rose, and being that rose and being this open thing that received. Now, that worked for me because I identify with roses. It doesn't have to be a rose, right? So let's say you identify with, I don't know, whatever it is. I mean, an animal of some kind, whatever. You could imagine that animal basking in the sun, and maybe you identify with a cat. Well, cats are great at receiving.
Right.
Maybe you identify with a dog. Dogs are great at receiving, right? Whatever image works for you, I would encourage people to just think of that image, and you really don't need a lot. You can bring it to your mind throughout the day. So when you feel kind of, stressed out, you can bring that image to your mind, so I would bring that rose to my mind multiple times a day, even when the image of itself wasn't right in front of me. I put it in different places. I put pictures of roses everywhere, so that I had one at work, and people don't know what it is. You don't have to tell them why it's there. That was an extremely powerful process for me. I mean, it sounds like nothing, right? But a lot of things that sound like nothing have a tremendous effect. So that was the very first thing that I did. And the other thing was that I had the poem. There's a piece of a poem by E.E. Cummings that says, "Yes is a world, and in this world of yes live all worlds." And I put that right next to the rose. And again, right when I woke up, right when I went to bed, yes is a world, and in this world of yes live all worlds. So that concept of yes came to me at that time. Yes is a perfect word to think about how to receive, not how to do for others, right? Not like, people talk about, oh, I say yes too much. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about saying yes to yourself, right? We're talking about saying yes to pleasure, deep pleasure and presence and beauty and, whatever feels good to you, because I believe that we don't take in pleasure. We take in this much of the pleasure that we're offered. And then we wonder why we're starving for touch, starving for love, constantly need attention, because when we're getting it, we're not receiving. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. It does. Let me ask you a question that might help people even more. It's a personal question, so you don't have to answer it, and I'll find another way around it.
Sure.
What was it about your life that led to the point that you couldn't receive naturally? What was it when you did work around it?
Yeah, well, I grew up in an alcoholic family, and my mom is sober. But, it took her a while, right? So I was a teenager by the time she got sober. She got sober a year before I did. And I think when you grow up in that environment, no one is paying much attention to you. They can't, because, you know, she loved me dearly, right? And loved us dearly, but she was a single mom. She had 3 kids that she was trying to take care of. I'm sorry. I just want to check our connection, because I just got a note that said my connection was unstable.
Yeah, mine did.
So I just want to, okay. As long as we can talk to each other, okay. I guess it's all right. And so I think when you have a single working mom, you know, who really is exhausted when she comes home, and then, you know, struggling with her own stuff, which I never even saw, right? She was a closet drinker. I didn't know. I had no idea she had a problem until she got sober. But I think when you're in that space, you know, the kids are just, their needs are not specifically taken care of, right? Yeah. They're not specifically looked at. We had, you know, the basics that we needed, but I truly didn't know what anger was, what fear was. I didn't know what to do with it. When I tried to write a fear list for the first time, I literally did not know what to write. I sat with a blank page in front of me going, well, I know I must have some fears. You know, I must, because everyone does, but I truly couldn't feel them. And I think part of the reason for that was because no one had time to sort of comfort us, right? No one had the time or the energy or whatever it was that they needed to attend to us in that way. And so I think as a child of an addict or an alcoholic, you get used to just completely ignoring your needs. You know, you just don't. You're basically, all of your attention is going toward your parents. Like, how can I help them? And how can I take care of everyone else so that I can eventually be okay? And so you don't pay attention to yourself. You know, I think it's actually kind of a classic thing.
So by the time you get a little bit older and people start coming into your life and start trying to give, you're like, what's happening? You're not used to receiving, and then it becomes a bit fearful and a bit, I'm not kind of used to this, which then makes sense as how you have to work on it. And then at the other end of that, whoever you're with in your life at that time who's trying to provide you with pleasure, then, you know, gets the dividends once you've done the work, I guess. So yeah, that makes more sense to me, Rosalyn. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And you see it all the time, because, you know, when I was, you know, my process was pretty harsh. I mean, people would try and be nice to me and I didn't trust them. I literally didn't trust you. You know, you're too nice. You know, I didn't like people who were too nice. You know, I didn't trust them. I didn't know what they wanted from me. You know, they didn't want anything, but I didn't know that way of life. And so I was very mistrustful of that kind of thing. And I think we all know people like that. You know, we all know people. A lot of us have felt that way. You know, you're being too good to me, or like, you know, the classic getting into a relationship in sobriety. And, you know, the person is, you know, if the person is too nice, a lot of times it won't work out in early sobriety, because people do not know how to accept the love coming at them. So
yeah, okay, yeah, I can see that there's a cynicism that comes out sometimes, isn't there, as well? I see that in circles quite a bit. What was I thinking about just then, Rosalyn? I was thinking about, we all have a responsibility here when it comes to learning to receive, if we're in relationships with people. So even if I don't have an issue with it, I could be living with somebody or in love with somebody who does. And something come up then that said to me, the way that I behave and my knowledge and understanding around what you're teaching becomes paramount, because I can then help the person I'm with to learn to be a better receiver. And I'll give you an example. I am absolutely terrible at being in the presence of my wife when she's going through pain, emotional pain. If she's going through physical pain, I'm there. I'll sort that out. I'll fix your cut and all that kind of stuff. I'll run down the shop and get you a plaster. But if she's got emotional pain, if she's depressed, if she's anxious, if she's fed up, if she's angry, this is how I deal with it, is why is she being like this to me? Why is she making me feel uncomfortable? Why is she making my life miserable? Why can't she just be cheery? Because now she's not. I'm really miserable. And it's a terrible, terrible part of my life that I'm trying to change, that I just cannot give her the presence and sit there without either A, trying to fix it, or B, getting angry. So what's your advice around being able to sit with someone else's pain? Because I think that's a big thing here, right?
Right. So there's a couple of things that come to mind. And the first one is read the book, You Just Don't Understand by Deborah Tannen. This is one of the best books ever written. It was done through research. She was researching something completely different, and she found that men and women often communicate very differently. And it's not always, and not everyone fits into this gender stereotype, but many times you find that men are communicating for one reason and women are communicating for another. So it's not that men will never communicate emotional pain, but usually when they're communicating emotional pain is because they want someone to give them advice, or, hey, I'm really hurting here. I need somebody to tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Women don't always communicate emotional pain for that reason. As a matter of fact, overwhelmingly, they communicate in order to get through it. By communicating the pain, they're not expecting you to fix it, right? They're not expecting you to do something to make them feel better, except just listen and go, wow, yeah, that must be tough. And for men, they're like, what? Like, aren't I making it seem like you can't handle it if I say that to you? No, because the reason why women talk about what they talk about is different than the reason why men talk about that. And so it's an excellent book. And I don't have a ton of time to get into it now, but please read that book.
Yeah.
Because it's exceptionally good at explaining the differences between what we communicate, how we communicate it, but in particular, why we communicate what we do, and what we're expecting back, what we would like back in those moments. A lot of men will feel as you do when a woman is, or anybody for that matter sometimes, is expressing emotional pain, but particularly women, they feel like guilty, like, oh, I'm supposed to do something here, and I must be doing something wrong because she still feels terrible. That's one thing, right?
Yeah.
And the second thing is, if you've been taught as a man, which a lot of men have, that emotional expression in that way is not okay, not okay, then you think to yourself, oh my God, she must be so over the top upset right now, because for you to get to that point, you would have to be really, really upset in order to actually express it. But it's not the same for women, right? So there's all these pieces to it, right? Like, she must be out of her mind upset. And then you say to her, why are you so upset? And it might be something that you feel is minor, right? Is this ringing a bell?
The minor thing definitely hits a bell. I don't think I have. I think I've been raised to express my emotions, and I know I have the ability to do it. Here's an interesting point, and this might kick off a light bulb in your mind. If you was to sit down with me and express an emotion like anger or frustration or whatever, I would be able to sit with you in your pain.
Right.
But because it's Liza, for some reason, it just drives me nuts. And I think it would be the same if it was my mum or my sister or my child. So the closer you are to me, the more difficult I find. Is it a boundary thing?
I think there's two main reasons why that usually happens. The first is that you feel responsible for them. You feel like it's your job to fix them,
Correct.
And you're not. So you must not be doing your job. And you're not responsible for their emotions, and you're not responsible for making them feel better. You can probably help just by sitting and listening and nodding and saying, yeah, I'm sorry you feel that way. You're not apologizing. You're just sympathizing, right?
Yeah.
But but you're not responsible for me, right? So it's easy for you to listen to me because there's no relationship between us where you feel responsible for me, right?
Yeah.
That's the first one. The second one is if you've been raised by people who don't pay attention to your needs, or you're in relationships with people who don't pay attention to your needs, then it's always about them. And it gets frustrating and you can get angry, right? Like you get sick of listening to their stuff because it's never your turn. So that's the second reason why that often happens.
It's the first one for me.
Yeah.
It's definitely the first one for me. I work incredibly hard at trying to shed my shame and my guilt around my divorce 9 years ago, my ability to be a father as a result of that because the child was involved. My new relationship now, when my wife is Californian, she lives in the UK, it's freezing cold, she doesn't want to be here. So I carry a lot of shame and guilt thinking all these choices and decisions are my fault. Therefore, when I see her upset or miserable that she's away from her mom or that this cold is getting to her, I feel responsible. And I don't know, there's some almost like passive aggressive subconscious thing that goes on that I deal with that with anger. I don't know, maybe I don't know what it is, but it's definitely something to look at.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so let's move into the sex stuff, right? Because I think when we talk about men and women not speaking the right language emotionally, we very definitely do not speak the right language when it comes to conveying our needs and our desires and pleasures and stuff like that. And first of all, I want to talk about sex in general and the taboo around it. You know, we have a community forum called Strive where we help people become people who don't drink alcohol. And I believe that sex is intricately tied up in that. Almost in every case, in one matter or another. But you wouldn't believe the amount of times I talk about my own personal sex life in order to give people a safe feeling that they can do the same. And then get people saying to me, "Wait, what are you talking about that for? I'm going to leave if you keep talking about that." Or, "I don't want to hear about your masturbating. I don't want to hear about your sex life problems." And in a way, as a forum leader, it kind of makes me want to shut down and stop doing it because I don't want to lose people. But then I feel like I'm cutting off people who could really benefit from it. So why is this big issue around talking about sex other than the usual, things that we hear about? What's your view on it?
So I did my doctoral work on this. It's called Errata Phobia.
I'd never heard of that before I read the book.
Yeah. Errata phobia is a term. It actually was a continuum. It was a scale that they created to kind of measure people's attitudes towards sex. And erotophilia was on one side, being like very good, positive feelings about sexuality. And erotophobia is on the other side, being very negative or fearful. Either one, they both come, this definitely comes from fear, the negative stuff, trauma, what have you. Everybody's erotophobic in some way, right? So erotophobia, because sex is such a huge topic, if you will. It is its own. I mean, the reason sexology is actually a field, sexology is not sexual psychology. Sexology is the study of human sexuality and people's attitudes about it, right? Behavior, attitudes, values, you name it, right? If you study sexual art, that would be part of the study of sexology. If you study pornography, that's part of the study of sexology. Sexology is huge. Sex is a huge, huge topic. So some people are homophobic, but they're not afraid to talk about masturbation, right? Some people will not talk at all about, I don't know, kink, something kinky, but they'll talk all day about, their orgasms. So it's a huge topic, and within erotophobia, there are separate things that people are willing or not willing to discuss, which is why when you're trying to do what you're doing, sometimes if you talk about one thing, you'll freak some people out and you'll
Yeah.
think, oh, those are the people that are scared to talk about sex. But then the next time you talk about it, you're talking about something else sexual, doesn't hit their button, and all of a sudden they're fine. And you're like, what? So but that's a typical reaction.
Yeah.
That's a typical reaction. And it's why we train people. So I am an author, obviously, but my main job is that I founded Institute for Sexuality Education and Enlightenment. And what we do is we actually train sexuality educators, counselors, therapists, clinicians, doulas, midwives, doctors, anyone who wants to be able to communicate better with the public about human sexuality as a professional. The first thing that we do is help them break down their own errata phobias by introducing them to this class called SAR, which is Sexual Attitude Reassessment. It used to be called Sexual Attitude Restructuring. But the idea is that you look at a variety of human sexual behaviors, attitudes, and orientations and identities, and you see which ones freak you out. You see which ones make you uncomfortable. And then as a professional, you take that in and you say, I seem to be fine with this, and this, but not so okay with this and this over here. I better look at these things. The goal is not to make every professional comfortable with everything. Right. And I would, give me a minute and I'll get back to like how this relates to any everyday person. But to make the professionals aware of what they're uncomfortable with, so that when they have a client in front of them or a patient in front of them or a student in front of them, depending on what they're doing, if that person mentions something that makes them uncomfortable, it doesn't freak them out in the moment. They can just say to themselves, oh, that person's talking about thus and such. And that's something that freaks me out. And I know that. So I'll just breathe while they're talking. There won't be a visible, on their face. There won't be, shock. They won't say, well, you sure you want to do that? They can have a more equanimity with topics. And what this means is it translates down that whoever those people are working with, they can actually be more comfortable, and then the people themselves will be more comfortable. So when you say, gosh, why can't I talk about these things without making some people uncomfortable, and what should I do? There's a whole way that you go about it, but we always recommend what I call graduated risk. And this is true even for an individual. So let's say you're a person in a new relationship with somebody, and you are very comfortable talking about sex, but you don't know who they are. Like, you don't know whether they're comfortable or uncomfortable. It's probably not the best idea on a first date to go, into a lot of sexual detail, right? Because you don't know what their boundaries are. Yeah. So what you do is you do some graduated risk with that person, right? And you take it from, you risk a little small detail about yourself and see if they're comfortable with that. And then I would just come right out and say, I'm really comfortable talking about sexuality. A lot of people aren't, let me know if I'm freaking you out, and that way you can kind of have a conversation with your clients or your community members or whoever it is that you're working with. I would go with the graduated risk thing, and say, well, rather than just throwing out a story, you can actually take people through some exercises for how to talk about sex and make them more comfortable. Or you can just say, well, whoever wants to talk about it, let's have another group.
I think the mistake I made, we actually have a sex and sobriety channel within our broader framework of the forum. So I think what I'll do after listening to you make some really good points, is I'm going to write to the forum and say, look, this is something that needs to have space. So I respect that you might not be interested in listening to it. So this is where we're going to have this conversation down here in this little corner. If you want to have it, that's where you're going to hang out. If you don't want to listen to me talk about my masturbating, then don't go into that little corner, There you go. I think I can see that one now. Okay, I have a question for you. There's I didn't realize this actually until I started this forum. I lost my virginity when I was 14 years of age. And apart from that night and a few times with that girl who was equally as young and ridiculously, stupidly young, I'm pretty sure that every sexual partner I ever had beyond that point was drunk, or I was drunk, or we were both drunk when we had sex, including towards the back end of my first marriage, my wife, you know. Yeah, obviously there would be times when you would have sex sober, but I would say right up in the high percentiles, 80, 90%, definitely over 99% of the people I had sex with, we were definitely drunk. And the times that I had sex was really difficult. And then when I went through a divorce and met Liza, I suffered from terrible sexual dysfunction. And I think a part of it was getting used to a different female form after 20 years. But I also think a big part of it was I'm actually having sex sober now. And all of a sudden, size matters. What I look like matters. How long I last matters. And none of these things mattered when I was drinking, because let's be honest, like when you're having sex, when you're drinking, it's a fucking car crash, right? You know, it's just your animals scratching and screaming and chucking things away. And it could last 1 minute and you think it's the best hour of your life.
Right.
What's happening here is people on the forum are quitting drinking. So I've got this one girl in mind, Sarah. Sarah's quitting drinking. And she wants to connect with her husband. But her husband drinks. And she doesn't know how to breach that barrier. And also because he's a man, of course, everything equals sex. So let's have a massage tonight instead of watching a football, equals sex. Give me a foot rub, equals sex. Will you rub my little finger, equals sex. And she's been asking, like, how do you get across to him in a really nice way and loving way that I don't want to have sex all the time and I have boundaries and I want to go on date nights and communicate and connect with you sober. How do you go about all that kind of? I know I threw a lot at you there, but
you did.
Yeah.
And so let's be clear that someone in a relationship with somebody else who is drinking is very different than somebody in a sober relationship, or in a relationship with somebody who doesn't drink a lot or drinks socially. Right.
Let's focus on the non-drinker dynamic then.
That's tough. It's really tough, because if this person has, they're, always drinking, or they, have, that's really tough. You could, what I would maybe suggest to that person is to be very structured and very specific with them. So you could suggest, okay, Sarah, you need to have a really specific conversation with your husband and say, hey, sometimes I just want touch. I don't want sex. So what I'd like to do is do both, but here's how we're going to do it. When I just want a foot rub, here's what I'm going to say. When I don't want it to lead to sex. And then, and I want that, I don't know, maybe she wants it 3 or 4 times a week, right? Maybe she wants 10-minute foot rub, but she wants that nightly, but doesn't mean she wants sex nightly, right? And she's probably, I'm guessing, willing to give him back whatever he wants, non-sexually, right, within that time. But it's very important. I mean, there's something that in sex therapy we call sensate focus. And sensate focus was created, the idea of it was created by Masters and Johnson, who were 2 of the first sex therapists in this country. And essentially what they did was they were really trying to sensitize these couples to sensuality, is what they were doing. And there were these 2 books years ago. I don't even know if they're still in print. They were called The Sensuous Man and The Sensuous Woman. And they were terrific books. And like I said, I don't even know if they're still in print. I would love to see them come out again. But what they were literally just helping you. And I think it was a deep yes. It was like, how do you touch someone and you receive while you're touching them? In other words, if I'm giving you a back rub, instead of me thinking about, well, I'm giving this to you and it only goes one way. Well, my hand is also feeling your back. My hand is also feeling touch as I do that. And my attention can go to the curve of your back. It can go. So can it be pleasurable for someone to just touch someone else, be the active toucher, and focus on hey, this is nice, you know? And I think most of us really identify with this when you have someone you long for, right? When you're not in a long-term relationship and you know this feeling, right? It's like, oh my God, I would love to touch that person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to touch them. And the first time you get to touch them, it's like, oh, this is so amazing, you know? And then of course, if you're with them a while, it's less amazing because you're used to it. But you can bring your attention back to the receiving that you're getting by touching that person. Sarah's not going to say that to her husband, right? She's not going to say, well, just focus on what you're getting out of touching me, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But what she could do is say, you know, the more that touch that I have where I don't wonder if it's going to go to sex, the more relaxed I get. And the more relaxed I get, the more I'm going to want to have sex. So if he sees it as something that could lead to more sex, maybe, you know, could, it sort of an investment, right? You know, you put your money away, it kind of hurts, you can't touch it later, it pays off more. Yeah. So it's the same idea here, right? Is they could have non-sex nights and they could she could work out some way of signaling him or letting him know, hey, I just want a foot rub. Can you just give me a foot rub? And this is something that I also find is a really interesting phenomenon that I talk a lot about with young people. And it dovetails with what you just asked me. So if you'll be patient with me, I'll
Sure.
describe it briefly. Guys and girls, when they're teenagers or college student age, at least here, you know, between 18 and 22, I work a lot with that age. And I have college, that age students for one of my cohorts of people that I teach. And I will say to them, okay, how many of you have ever been in the situation? One of you, you know, you're attracted to each other, something's happening, but you're not really 100% sure what's going to happen, maybe, or what you want to have happen. And I'm going to be gender stereotyping. I'm going to say a lot of the times it's the guy who doesn't know what's going to happen and the woman who doesn't know whether she wants to go certain, you know, too far or exactly what she wants to do sexually. And she might say something like, listen, I don't know what I want to do here, you know, or, you know, I don't want to go all the way. You know, honestly, I don't know what the verbiage now is nowadays.
It's been a while.
Yeah. But they'll say something, right? They'll indicate, you know, I want to go slow. That might be something that they say, right? And if the guy says something like, or the partner says something like, oh, no problem, and really makes her feel comfortable and says, I'm just perfectly happy doing whatever you want to do. Let's make out a while, you know, no problem whatsoever. And if she can feel that for him, next thing you know, they're having sex.
Yeah.
So
go on, Karen.
So the interpretation of that on the guy's side is, there's actually a research term for it, and I hate it so much because it's such a misunderstanding of what's going on. It's called token resistance.
Right.
And the belief is on both sides. Both people think this is true. Well, she just didn't want to look like a slut. She didn't want to look like a skank. So she just tokenly said, oh, I don't know if I want to, just to look like not a skank. And then once she put up that quote token resistance, it was she could go ahead and have sex. Completely disagree with that. Right. Here's what I think is happening. She doesn't know if she wants to have sex with him until she feels safe.
Yeah.
She doesn't know if she wants to have sex with him until she believes that if he's doing something she doesn't like and she says no, he will stop. And once she feels safe, she wants to have sex a lot more. So that's what's actually happening. And that's what I encourage people to do is like, look, if you want to have more sex with your partner, make them feel like you care about what they want to do. Pay attention to what they want to do and what they don't want to do. Give them a lot of physical attention that isn't necessarily direct sexual contact, and they will beg you for sex, you know? And this is going back to your Sarah situation. If she can kind of find some way to communicate that to him, like, look, this is probably going to lead to more sex. That might work.
That is part of the problem, isn't it? Because the people let me get this right. I'm just going to make a huge assumption here. So let me think about this. I guess it is an assumption, but what's going on in my mind is it's more likely that people listening to podcasts like this and conversations like this and reading books like you are the people who have got problems with their partners, not problems with themselves. So it almost becomes like, wow, if my husband was listening to this, then maybe he'd be able to get his act together. So the conundrum becomes, how can I get my husband to understand this without him creating his phalanx of defenses coming up? Because I can imagine the situation whereby, like I'm talking about personal experience, obviously, when I get frustrated that I can't have sex, and then I start acting like a petulant child instead of saying, yeah, I understand. Okay. It's like a frustration that I'm not getting what I want. And you need to, because I talk to people like yourselves and I read people like yours book and I'm interested in this, it allows me to understand my wife a lot more and to make those, what I will say in inverted commas, very difficult changes. I mean, I've had to make some really difficult changes the last couple of weeks that seem to be going completely against how I work biologically, not psychologically, biologically.
Right.
And so I think that's the key, but it goes back to communication. I say this a lot in Strive. I don't know what you think about this, Rosalyn, but all of these things come back to knowing and understanding how to communicate what your boundaries are, what you want, what you desire, what you want to receive, what you want to give, what is acceptable, what isn't. It all goes back to go to the library and pick the greatest book you can on communication and learn how to communicate to your partner. And none of this matters.
Right. And You Just Don't Understand is a great place to start, because literally she's a linguist and it's all about men and women in communication. Right. And so if you're in, and I would say, even if you're queer, even if you're, no matter what your gender identity is, no matter what your partner's gender identity is or orientation is, a lot of times you'll have one partner with one style, what Deborah Tannen would call a masculine communication style, and you'll have another partner with a quote feminine communication style, and that so it often doesn't matter orientation. But if you have a male-female partnership, a lot of times you'll find that it goes that way. I'm actually the opposite. It's really funny.
Right.
I have a very, what she would consider a masculine communication style, because I'm very direct. I just say what I think, and I have had to scale that back, because I'm female and people don't expect it from you. And when you're very direct, it kind of freaks some people out. And I have found, even with men, like, especially when I was younger, now that I'm older, almost everyone appreciates it.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I mean, and not necessarily sexually, but just in every arena, I'm just like, oh, and I would just say what I would think. And, people just weren't used to it. They were, and so, you need to know your own communication style. But it's funny, this piece about touching touching without it leading to intercourse is so important, because I think the more that you touch someone in a way that isn't necessarily assuming anything, and the more comfortable that the touch can get with affection that is not necessarily leading, a lot of times it will lead to a much better sex life and more frequent sexuality. Yeah. And I wish that I could get that across, in more forums, because it's true. It's not always true. No. Especially if someone has young kids that are hanging on them all day. Oh my God. Not interesting.
That's something that we could talk about, actually. All right, I'm going to give a real life example, not because I'm a narcissist or I like talking about myself, although I do, but I think it's a really good educational standpoint to have a real life example. So we have a 17-month-old daughter, right? So you can imagine my wife is, and she breastfeeds still. So she's continually in mother mode, right? And then I trot along and say, oh, look, Zia is asleep. Quick, let's do it now, right? Now, me and Liza had a conversation. We've been away for a month, and then she came over to the UK after a month. And something happens with Liza that has never happened with any other partner before in my life. I feel a tremendous biological urge to make love to her when I haven't seen her for a long time. I've never felt it before. It is not psychological. It is definitely biological. She comes anywhere near me, and I've got an erection. I'm tingling. I'm like, there's something going on, right? And it's all, I don't know whether it's age. I don't know whether it's love, connection. I don't know what it is, but it's there, right? So I found myself saying to Liza, we were having a few problems, and I found myself saying to her, look, when you've put Zia to bed, come in the bedroom so we can have a cuddle.
Right.
She was very frosty, and I'm trying to kiss her and have a cuddle, but she's frosty. So I'm saying, and that was making me feel bad. So then I said to her, well, what's the frostiness? And she said, well, to be honest, you're only doing it because you want sex. So I said, I do want sex, but I'm not just doing this because I want sex. I'm doing it because I believe that if we kiss and cuddle, we're going to get closer connected.
Yes.
And we're going to feel closer, and eventually sex will happen naturally. So she heard me and understood me. And then the next day I said to her, let's have a massage tonight. And she said, yeah, but no sex. And I got angry again. Right. And I sat down and I said, look, this is how I think we should play this. I'm going to put the decision on whether or not we have sex entirely into your hands. I'm going to promise you as your husband that I will never ask you or push you for sex. I'm telling you now as a male, 43 years of age, I can have sex anytime and will be ready anytime, right? So I'm going to put that decision over to you. But what I do want to do every night is I want to touch you. I want to caress you. I want to kiss you. I want to make out. I want to get it on. And I don't care how horny that makes me feel. I am not going to ask you for sex. But the moment you grab it or you do something that I know is a indication that you want to have sex, off we'll go. 2 days later, in the shower, Bob's your uncle, right? That's what we're talking about, right? That ability to ride that uncomfortableness, that really awkward, uncomfortable defenses coming up. You're feeling unloved, but you've got to get through it and sit down and find a way together that works for both parties. And then all of a sudden, that it happens almost like naturally, right?
Absolutely. You did such a perfect thing there, because you gave her control and you made her feel safe. And she did something which is a common mistake of a lot of women and, other genders too, but it's often, like I said, it often plays out this way. Women and men often do sex differently. So women often need to feel close to someone in order to have sex. Men have sex in order to feel close to someone. And though not always, right? Sometimes just casual sex, like, yeah, let's get it on. It's biological, entirely biological, and no psychological attached. But two big secrets that I've learned as someone who, literally hundreds of people, probably more than that, probably thousands at this point. I mean, I've been in this field for 30 years. I've been doing, therapy and, health education, which includes sex education. So it's probably been thousands of people at this point. Guys want emotional connection way more than is talked about. They think they're the only ones, but they get emotional connection through that sexual connection a lot of times.
Right.
And it's exactly what you just said. You are actually seeking emotional connection and closeness with your wife through sex.
Yeah.
And she doesn't get it. She sees it as, well, he just wants something for himself. And, this is compounded. In your case, it's compounded. This is so classic. She's breastfeeding. Breastfeeding kills the sex urge. Oxytocin is flowing through her system. Right. And I think it's Pitocin. No, it's not Pitocin. There's another hormone, and forgive me, I have to look it up. But when you're breastfeeding, it kills the sex urge. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Because, you don't want to have another baby while you're still breastfeeding one.
Yeah,
right?
To me, it makes absolute bang on biological sense.
Biologically, it makes sense.
Yeah.
and also on top of that, you have the psychological that this thing is hanging off of your breast half the day, you know, and this thing needs you not only emotionally, but also physically. Right. And now you've got your husband who needs you physically. Right. And so there's this, it's so difficult. But as you said, you know, what you did was you offered her some touch and you said, I'm never going to ask you for it. I'm going to give you touch and we're only going to have sex when you want to. So what you did was you offered her a one-way, you know, touch that she knew, oh, okay, this isn't about his needs. He really is paying attention to my needs. He really is touching me, you know, so that I feel good. So there's a misunderstanding often on the woman's side that it's just that you want something from her and not that you want something with her.
Yeah, no,
And
I
there's
totally get that.
standing on the other side about, you know, about that. But you know, you found a great solution.
You have to the way I see it is you can't play games here. You can't you need to be 110% genuine about what you're saying. You can't say what I said, that I'm giving you the controls here about whether or not we have sex or not, and then start moaning or whinging or pushing. You've really got to show them that they can trust you, because what I'm finding in my relationship is trust is not just one overarching thing for the relationship. She needs to trust me in so many different areas. She needs to trust me as a father. She needs to trust me as a husband. She needs to trust me sexually. She needs to trust me in so many different ways. And you do really need to learn that trust. And again, it all goes back to communication again. It's interesting because Maureen on the forum, she asked me to ask you, how do we, scheduling sex for the busy couple with kids versus letting it happen organically? Well, I guess we just covered that, right?
I mean, somewhat, but yeah, very important to schedule sex. And people say, oh, well, then that kills the mood. No, it doesn't have to kill the mood at all. Because if you look at it like, yeah, man, Saturday night, we're getting it no matter what, then you can plan for it. You can tease each other about it. You can say, you know what I'm going to do to you tomorrow night, and you can kind of get the mood going for it. So anticipation is actually a great sexual tool if it's used correctly. And we shouldn't think of it as, oh, it's killing the spontaneity. But planning, is important in scheduled sex. So try and get a decent chunk of time. Half an hour ain't going to cut it. I mean, if that's all you can do, fine. But usually if you try hard enough, you can make, 2 or 3 hours happen. You go out to dinner, or have some food first and just freaking relax and don't, it's not all about getting right in bed. And then when everybody's relaxed, then, start your lovemaking process. But very important to schedule sex and to say, well, this is the night we have available. And this is what we're going to do. And it's not that you couldn't necessarily change your mind. I mean, sometimes people are just like, I'm exhausted. And it's all right, well, let's just take a nap then. But in general, yeah, scheduling sex is really important. And it does not have to kill the mood.
And I think if you're working at your relationship and your communication skills and you're building up connection and you've got these real strong boundaries that are being respected, when you do schedule sex night for once a fortnight on a Saturday night, you are more likely going to be looking forward to it. You are more likely going to be nipping off to the shop to buy yourself a new pair of underpants or knickers or whatever. You are more likely going to be thinking to yourself, what are we going to do that's going to be slightly different to spice things up? But if you're at each other's throats all the time. Let's go back to the example of the drinker versus non-drinker. If we are in a situation where we're just giving up drinking alcohol, we look at our husband and he's drinking on the couch all the day, and we're looking at him thinking, do I really want to be with somebody who's putting that down them? He's got his big beer gut, he's burping, he's watching a football, he doesn't give a toss about. Then you're not going to want to be excited about giving him anything on a Saturday night for sex night. And if he turns around and says to you, hey, I think we should have sex night, you're going to be like, go away, mate, that ain't happening. So you do need somehow, and we talk about this a lot on Strive, you need to start from yourself. You need to take the lead and say, look, I ain't happy in this relationship. me and you need to have a talk about how we're going to put that right, you know?
Mm-hmm. The other piece that we haven't really touched on that's so important is, what is sex? You know, if somebody doesn't want penetrative sex, it doesn't mean that you can't have other kinds of sex, you know? And so, you know, sometimes if a partner is just not up for being penetrated or having penetrative sex, being the one who penetrates, well, what are they up for? You know, are they up for giving some pleasure of some kind? And some people say, well, I don't want to make them do that. Well, if they're happy to do it, what's the problem? You know, like, you know, a lot of times people are like, I just don't want to be entered tonight. But yeah, sure, I'll give you a hand job. You know, I mean, like, why not? You know, and so not as a sort of not as an obligated thing, but as a true offer of, you know, what else can we do? And this is really important as people get older, or people who have dysfunctions of different kinds. Sex is not just penetration, you know, and in fact, like, you know, there are so many other kinds of sex that people can have that can be tremendously satisfying. And people who have to find those, you know, other ways because of, you know, perhaps dysfunction of some kind, or age, or disability, if you will, they will tell you, you know, some people with, you hear these stories and they are common. They are not uncommon stories. People who have been paralyzed, for instance, and they literally have no feeling from, you know, the waist down or what have you. But there's this one spot right on their shoulder right here where if you lick that, they're going to come.
Right.
How does that happen? Well, guess what? We all have that. We all have the ability to transfer our sexual feelings to different parts of our bodies. All of us. I know people who have had orgasms from being licked in the ear. I know people have had orgasms from entering someone else with a finger. I mean, you know, sex is so much bigger than this.
Well,
much bigger.
If you think about it, my first ever wet dream, was actually a dry dream, was when I was about 9 years of age. And between 9 and 43, I've had that one dry dream and 2 wet dreams. But the reason I'm bringing that up is nobody touched me, right? I somehow had a dream and it happened. So that goes to show that, you know, if people are thinking, well, your finger can't do it, well, you manage it in sleeping. You wake up in a mess and you think, oh, you know, so it's quite amazing. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about, I'm not switching gears. What am I on about? I'm talking about the same kind of stuff. Susanna on the site the other day, she was talking about getting caught watching pornography. So I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit. When I was going through my sexual dysfunction, and by sexual dysfunction, what it meant was I could not achieve orgasm. I couldn't maintain an erection during intercourse. And I couldn't come during intercourse, right? I have no idea what was going on with me, but I'm not like that. It's gone now, but it was a horrific time in my life. And I really thought my wife was going to leave me, you know, because of that, you know? And one of the things that I did that really helped, and it was a catalyst actually, is I realized in that moment that when I was being frustrated, I would run to pornography. And I had a thought for the first time in my life. I just said to myself, Lee, just think about your life of pornography, going all the way back to just reading Freeman's catalogs when I was 9 and seeing the stocking section. I had literally used pornography probably 5 days a week, if not more, to come for my entire life. Now, if that is not an addiction, I don't know what is, right? So I also got caught up with the old sex industry thing, you know, the YouPorn videos. Is this woman I'm watching really want to be in this video, especially when you're watching bondage, BDSM type things. And I decided I'm not watching pornography anymore. I don't want any part of it. And I stopped it cold turkey. I haven't watched pornography for a long, long time now. And my problems ended. And so I want to ask your opinion on that. I don't watch pornography anymore today. So because I don't watch pornography, as I was saying to my wife the other day, it does block off an outlet sort of in terms of when I'm feeling horny. You know, I'm like, I say that's probably why I'm pestering you all the time, is I don't look at pornography. And I haven't masturbated. I decided not to masturbate because I was uncomfortable with it. So I've quit pornography, I've quit masturbation. And then, you know, Susanna was saying about her getting caught, and then what do I do? Because I'm sure that he heard it. So again, I'm firing a lot at you here, but do we even have to have conversations with our partner about the fact that we watch pornography and we masturbate? Do we have to? Is that our own private thing? And what are the merits here? What are the pluses and minuses here of my decision to not watch pornography and not to masturbate?
Right. So there's a difference between no porn and no masturbation. And you know, years ago, now it's this, there's lingo about it on some of the forums online, right? So one of them is no porn, and one of them is no FAP, and the no FAP is no masturbation, right? Because it's the sound, you know.
All right. I was wondering that. Yeah. I was like, what's that acronym?
Yeah. So the no porn seems to me to be a more workable and probably more realistic and probably healthier for most people. I cannot comment on whether or not you should be masturbating. Like, that is really a personal choice of your own. But I can say that masturbating without porn versus masturbating with porn are very different things. And I think that the issue is more your own imagination, right? So porn is feeding us imagery, and porn is no longer Playboy, right? I mean, porn is now 16 screens showing you 3-minute, 2-minute, 1-minute, 30-second hot spots of intense activity, right? So to me, and people will say, in my field, people will argue against the idea that porn could be addictive. They see compulsive behavior. They do not argue about that, but they argue about the term addiction for it. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to get into the debate about whether it's addictive or not addictive. What I want to say is that it's clearly very different to me, the nature of imagery when it's a still picture on a page that might turn you on versus a super highlighted, you know, intense piece of activity that lasts a minute or two, right? And then flip to the next thing and flip to the next thing and flip to the next thing. It's a very different experience. At least if you have a picture on a page, you are having to imagine something. You're using your imagination. So let's say you've decided no porn at all. The first thing I want to say is that for whatever reason, I can guess, but I don't want to because it's not scientific. That seems to work for a lot of men. So a lot of men, young men, who should not be having erectile dysfunction. Erectile dysfunction for young men was virtually unheard of in Kinsey's time, right? Unheard of in the 70s. You don't hear of it. And then the internet comes along. And these different types of pornography that are constantly at our fingertips, and you can see any behavior instantly.
Yeah.
Now, all of a sudden, we have slews of young men with erectile dysfunction, slews of them. Most of them, many of them, many of them. I don't know about most. I don't know statistics.
Yeah.
You will hear over and over again anecdotally that people will say, I quit porn and it went away, just like you just did, right? And what I would say is it's different to quit porn than to quit masturbating. I think you being able to imagine something sexually is extremely important. And so what I would say is experiment and maybe go ahead and go back into masturbation, but do not allow yourself porn to masturbate. Allow yourself your own imaginings. You know, where does your own brain go? Where does your own mind go? What does it imagine? And that can be extremely helpful. And then C, you know, you might go a little crazy for a while because you haven't been allowing yourself this. But, you know, so then watch it, pay attention to it, and then maybe you might have to scale back and say, well, maybe I don't imagine anything. Maybe I just touch myself until I come, you know. But, and again, I could never make that decision for another person. But I do think that no porn versus no FAP are two very, very different decisions.
I'm interested in your opinion on a couple of things that come out of that. So I'm pretty certain I'm never going to watch porn again. I'm pretty certain about that, right? The masturbation thing, I tell you what was going on for me was I wanted to feel super duper connected to my wife. You know, we're having a few problems. We have a lot on. We've got a young kid. I've got two kids. I've got different kids on different continents. I've got a wife who wants to live in a different continent. You know, we have a lot of stresses in our life. You know, we weren't getting on very well, and I really want to connect with her. And as we talked about earlier on, sex is one of the ways that I feel that I'm going to get emotional connection. Only one of them. I also understand that I have to show up for a whole space for that kind of stuff as well. But when it comes to masturbation, I think the reason that I stopped is I didn't like the way I was using it. So the thought of me saying to myself, like we have a thing called white space that we talk about on the forum. When you stop drinking alcohol, the fog lifts from your brain and your life changes, and suddenly you have a lot of time on your hands and a lot of thoughts space. And we call that white space. And we say, how are we going to fill that white space? Because if we don't fill it, it's very likely you'll fill it with alcohol or the things that you used to do, right? So I could imagine one of the great ways of filling white space is to say to yourself, well, tonight I'm going to run a really nice bath with a lot of essential oils. I'm going to have a bath and I'm going to make myself come. I can imagine that, right?
Yes.
But not for me, you know? That's not the way I was using masturbation. The way I would masturbate is this. My wife and daughter leave the house, and within seconds of them leaving the house, I'm saying to myself, I need to come. And for no reason whatsoever. And that was really bothering me because it was doing a couple of things. One, why am I doing it? I don't like this behavior. It feels almost automated and out of my control. Two, each time I come, it's like I'm losing something. Like I'm losing a certain essence or an ability to connect. So I feel further away. If she comes back in, I don't feel as connected to her because I've just reached an orgasm. Like it's on a sexual level, right? So that was bugging me. And the other thing was bugging me was I don't always think about my wife when I masturbate. And I was in a bit of turmoil about that because I was wondering whether that in itself was A, moral and morally correct, and B, whether that was causing a distance between us.
Right.
I'm also very mindful I might be overthinking this, by the way, but so I'm interested in your thoughts on those few points.
Okay, so that was a lot, and there's a lot to address there. But here's where I would start. Masturbation is our sexual relationship with ourselves. So are you treating it that way? That would be my main question to you. You know, cut through all the crap and say, what kind of sexual relationship do you want to have with yourself? And write it down, you know, take some time and think about that. Like what do you want to get out of your sexual relationship with yourself? Do you want to feel good about yourself? Is that part of it? Do you want to feel physically great? Do you want physical pleasure? Physical pleasure is a good thing. It's a good thing. It makes us feel good about the world. The oxytocin that comes after an orgasm. What do you do after you come? Do you breathe it in? Here's the deep yes again. How are you coming? Are you coming in 2 seconds in the shower? Are you, right. So, or are you touching your body in different places than your genitals before you start? Are you loving yourself up a little bit? You know, how would you want to be touched by someone who loved you? Are you touching yourself in a similar fashion? Only you know all of your favorite parts, and only you are probably willing to touch all of them for as long as you want them to be touched. So why would you deny yourself that, right? So for instance, a lot of people love the taint, right? Which is that section between the anus and the scrotum, right? And for that matter, there's a similar space for women.
The perineum.
Yes, yes. So, and I'm of course using the non-clinical term.
I got to know the perineum quite well when Liza was going through her pregnancy.
Okay, great.
It was my job to stretch it.
Right. There you go. But so the thing is, but not everybody's interested in touching it on someone else, but you can touch it for as long as you want on yourself if that's something that makes you feel good, right? So, what are your goals for your sexual relationship with yourself? What would you like to have happen for yourself? And I would start there and kind of ask yourself those questions. Our sexual selves are as much a part of us as our spiritual selves, our emotional selves, our intellectual selves, our physical self. Like, our sexual selves are part of who we are. And to treat them as though there's something dirty, which is, I'm hearing from you. I know you didn't say those words, but what I'm hearing from you is, I shouldn't want this. It's not kosher. Like, if I were truly enlightened man, I wouldn't need this. Bullshit.
Well,
I call bullshit. Right?
I could tell you exactly what happened to me, and you will find this fascinating, probably, or even though you won't, you'll probably go, yeah, I've heard this before. As soon as you said and started to describe how you would like to be touched, right? So that perineum, for example, if somebody licked my perineum, I think I would melt. Like, I think I would have a meltdown, right? But my mind is immediately, when you started talking about people masturbating and touching themselves in the right way, went straight to pornography. My brain just went straight to pornography, and I saw a woman masturbating exactly like you described, but I don't see a man anywhere doing that. And my only recollection of a man masturbating is, quick, I've got 5 minutes. Let's knock one out in the bedroom before the wife comes home. So
I have a wonderful website for you.
Right.
I have a wonderful website. It's called orgasmicyoga.com.
I'm going to check it out.
It'll cost you some money,
and
it's instructive. It's not porn, and it will look for the guys, not the girls. You don't want to watch porn, right?
Yeah.
So there are instructional videos on sensual masturbation, and they are specific.
Okay.
There's one, I can give you the exact links when we get off here, but that would be a great way to learn. There's no porn in them. In most of them, actually. There's one that shows guys how to be more embodied when they're watching porn. But for your purposes, I would stay away from that because you've already determined that doesn't work for you. There are multiple, and some of them are pretty wild because these guys are ecstatics. But there's one in particular I would direct you to. And you're right. There are no realistic porn videos of men being sexual in any way. One of my biggest problems with porn is that it's not just how the women are treated, although that is in and of itself a problem. So one of the best descriptions of porn, I used to talk about, I used to use football as a metaphor. Dr. Marty Klein has this wonderful metaphor. He uses football, and forgive me because it's not, when I'm saying football, I'm talking about American football. But the point is that
I read it in your book, I think.
Yeah, you have these, but this is different.
Right. Okay.
Marty Klein talks about, if you watch the football highlights and that's all you ever watched, and you thought that was football,
you'd be really disappointed. Know how to play football. Bang on. Porn, I like that. Yeah.
Right? Porn is watching the highlights and thinking you know how to play. That's not how it looks in real life. And one of my big issues with porn is that the men never talk. They never smile. They never laugh. The only kind of talking that happens is some kind of, hey, you dirty slut. That's
aggressive.
Okay.
It's aggressive.
Well, you know what? Some people like that. I don't judge that at all. That's fine. If both people are into that, fine. But that's all you ever hear. You never hear, hey, baby, I love you. Oh, you look so beautiful. Men say that when they're having sex, right? You don't see that in porn.
Yeah.
Men looking into the partner's eyes, men smiling, men laughing, men saying, hey, wait a minute, bad position for me. Let me move. None of that happens in porn because they're only showing you these intense little highlights. And you don't, and then people not understanding, they've been watching porn for years. Most people have never watched two people actually make love. Which is another thing that you can find in specific places if you're interested. But if you watch people actually make love, it looks very, very different than porn. Very different, right? There's a kissing, there's touching, there's hugging, there's discussions, there's moving around so people are more comfortable or having more fun or having more pleasure. And so, one of my biggest things about men in porn is that porn does not show realistic view of women, but it does not show a realistic view of men at all.
I remember.
So,
I remember when I first met Liza and started having sex with Liza. There was a point where she just, all right, I had the dysfunction as well, which was a problem. But there was a point where she was just basically like, "What the fuck are you doing?"
Yeah. And you're doing what you've watched. You're doing what you've watched, right?
She was like, slow down, chill out. Like, where are you, man? Yeah. And it was really embarrassing because I was thinking about, I'm in my late 30s and I don't have a fucking clue what I'm doing. Yeah.
And I hate to say it, but it's not your fault. Because basically this is how porn has become our sex ed.
Is there
and that is wrong. That is just wrong because it's not that porn is wrong per se. It's that it's terrible sex ed. It's fine for entertainment. When you watch a movie, at least here, right? You don't want to watch a movie about somebody's day. You want to watch a movie where something happens, something dramatic happens. There's a conflict. The conflict is resolved. Maybe there's action. Maybe there's sex, whatever. And it's the same thing with porn. You're not going to watch a porn of like just a general sexual interaction because that's not entertainment. But when you talk about sex ed, you have to look at those things. That's why when we do what we do, we show documentary footage of people actually having sex, not porn.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's much more instructive.
How are you for time? Because I know I've only got 4 minutes of your time. Do you have to run?
Yeah. I don't have to run, but I probably have to stop at about 11:45 here. So I don't know what time that is there.
Okay. So that's another, okay. Right. Because I want to ask you, I need to ask you a question from a Strive member, but something else just come up to me that I want to talk to you about. I remember a Strive member talking about their husband continually looking at other women on social media. And telling the husband not to do that because it didn't make them feel good. And then the guy continually doing it. I'm not on social media anymore. And one of the reasons I'm not on social media is because I found when I stopped looking at porn, I started to pay more attention to the crap my friends and their friends were putting on my feed. Women in bikini, because this is now not porn as we would know it, but women. What would be an ideal example? A friend or a friend of a friend or a friend's wife or whatever, they're dressed up to go out for the night with a nice skirt on with the boobs out and the heels, and they're looking fantastic. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at that more intently than I would when I would, before when I was watching pornography.
Right. But I'm going to interrupt you here because this goes back to something you said earlier. And I would challenge and ask you to ask yourself different questions. So it sounds to me like you're judging yourself that all of a sudden you're becoming somehow more predatory or something, or more objectifying. And I would challenge you to say that there are people with higher sex drives and there are people with lower sex drives. And there should be no judgment to that. There are people who love football. They could watch it all freaking day long. I'm not one of them, right? Yeah. There are people who love quilting. There are people some people love sex They love it. They love to have it. They have high sex drives. That does not make them a sex addict. It makes them a person with a high sex drive. You may very well be a person with a high sex drive. So when you stop porn and you stop masturbating, of course you're going to see and notice more real women, right?
Everywhere.
Like, yeah, good. So fine. So stop judging it. That's what my recommendation to you would be. Stop judging it and just say, hey, I'm a horny dude. Good for me. Breathe. And don't think it means anything. You're not going to contact that woman and try and do something about it, right?
No. This is the thing that I battle with constantly, because I'm obviously only in my own head and not everybody else's head, right? Yeah. Is I will walk down the street. What's happening in today's age? When I was younger, growing up, women used to wear jeans, and they very rarely wore tight-fitting jeans. It was just baggy jeans. When I go out now anywhere, everybody's in yoga gear. Everybody is in yoga. There's always a very well-defined bum in my face, right? And I'm walking around, and I am noticing it everywhere. And here's the problem is, I then start thinking to myself, is this wrong? Like I'm battling against the biological desire to look and the psychological thought that I'm somehow a bad husband because of that. And so I'm keep having these internal conversations saying, I don't want to have sex with the woman I've just seen. I don't want to have sex with this girl on Instagram. But I can still look at it and go, wow, that's turning me on. But
what if we turned this completely around and we said, Lee, awesome. You're a sexual guy. How cool. How cool that you're that alive. How cool that you're in touch with your body to that extent that you feel that. You go, woo, look at that. If you thought it was her job to do something about it, you'd be a scumbag. That's not what's happening.
Yeah.
If you were going to cheat on your wife as a result of it, you'd be a scumbag. That's not what's happening, right? What's happening is simply you as a sexual being in the world, and maybe with a higher sex drive than some people, maybe not. Who cares? Maybe you do, right? And you should see how women with high sex drives feel. I mean, if you think you feel like a pervert, women are told that they're not supposed to have sex drives. And all this supposed research, which, by the way, most of which is misinterpreted, they feel really like there's something wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with you. So you notice. Good for you. And I want to tell you a story. I was in a training program actually for drug and alcohol counseling long time ago. And it was a Saturday morning. We had classes on Thursday nights and Saturdays all day. And that was to help us because we were all professionals. We weren't like in school full time. And Saturday morning, this guy comes in. I'm just going to call him Emilio. I don't remember his name. And he came in and he was like, hey, and he was hugging all of the women. And, we liked him. He was a great guy. And, somebody said to him, hey, Emilio, what's going on with you today? And he goes, I'm horny. And he came up and he hugged the next woman. And every woman in that hallway laughed.
Yeah.
There wasn't an offended person in that hallway. And I thought, gee, isn't that funny? Including me. We all laughed. We thought it was funny. And I thought, why is it that we didn't see that as creepy? And I'll tell you exactly why. Because Emilio was not, in his manner, in his energy, or in his words, expecting us to take care of that for him.
Right.
He owned it, right? And he was fine with it, right? Like, I'm horny, yeah, And because he was 100% fine with it and was not looking for someone else to take care of it for him, he didn't come off as creepy at all. And so I think that as long as you own that piece of yourself, the other piece is I would really rethink the whole no masturbation thing on your part, because I think that by denying yourself masturbation, you just might be walking around like a walking hard on, and that's not comfortable. That's not comfortable.
I like what you said. We're always on the lookout for joy and happiness. And if you think about it, being horny is a part of that. For me, it is anyway.
Yes,
so if you're repressing your horniness and you're not allowing it to come out, you're affecting your joy and happiness. So that's something that I'm definitely going to think about. A lot.
Exactly.
I like the book part in your book where you said you was dancing with that guy, you know, the guy that
Yeah.
you remember from school. And then
Yeah.
you were saying to yourself, oh, I can't think that he's hot because like I'm married or in a relationship or something. And then you
Yeah.
thought, fuck it. I am going to. I know my boundaries, but I'm going to really feel this. And I was reading it thinking, I was envious. I was thinking to myself, isn't it a shame because of, I was going to blame culture and worldview here, but it's actually my own responsibility. Isn't it a shame that you can't be like that with other women, knowing that you're not going to take it to intercourse or to be out of line, and yet that the world would look at that and think that guy's a despicable human being. He has a wife. That is a personal responsibility, and that's a conversation if that's what you're into. But I loved it. It was just the spontaneity of it, and your boldness to do that, and then walk away and go like, yeah, great, you know, and just walk away feeling wonderful. You know.
Well, and think about it. You give your wife you give your wife something, a privilege that you're not giving yourself. You know, you believe that her body is hers and that you don't have a right to it, right? And you've demonstrated by what you said earlier. You said, you know, you said to her, you know, well, you know, here's what I want, but you get control over when we do it, because you know that you don't own her body, right? And you know that it's not yours. Wait a minute. If she gets to have her own sexuality and her own boundaries and her own sexual responses, no matter what they be, and you believe that that's true and that's right, then the same is true for you, even if those boundaries or reactions are different ones. Yeah. As long as your behavior is still within your monogamy agreement, like you guys are clearly have a monogamy agreement.
We do, yeah.
So, you know, if your behavior is still within the monogamy agreement, then your reactions are yours. Just like hers are hers, whether they be yes or no. It's got to be okay. Boundaries are not all about no. You know, boundaries have got to be about yes as well, or they're not boundaries. There's no such thing as a no if there's no such thing as a yes.
Agree with that, yeah. Okay. All right, last question before I let you go. This is from Emily on the Stride Community Forum. Emily says, I'm just going to read it out. She said, like, how do you know if you are just one of those people who is not into sex, or if you have sexual dysfunction, or if it's the relationship? Especially when every single one of your relationships or sexual experiences have gone this way, i.e., I have not once actually been sexually attracted to the person she's with. Is it a woman thing, an abused child thing? How do you fix it? I've tried everything. Frankly, I've given up. I feel horrible even saying this. It just seems sad. That's what Emily wrote. What's your views on that?
Two different strong possibilities. The first one is it could be sexual trauma. In other words, if this person experienced, you know, abuse when they were younger, or rape at some point, or even just being touched without their permission a lot, you know, when they were kids, or when they were adolescents, or for a long period of time, that can turn you off completely because sex just doesn't feel safe. Yeah. The second one actually is it might be the wrong gender. Did they address that? Did she address whether or not she's been with people of different genders?
No.
So they could be they could be attracted to a different gender than the person that they're with. Right. And that might be taboo for them, and they might not have ever explored that. The third thing is they could be truly asexual. There are people who are born with no sex drive, never comes. Right. And that's something that she can actually explore. There's a website called aven.org, AVEN, and that's for asexuals. So that person could definitely explore that and see if it makes sense to them. Some people truly have no sex drive. It's okay. You're normal that way. And, you know, you just, you know, you'll find ways to learn about yourself through that way. But those are the three most common possibilities.
Rosalyn, I want to thank you. It's been
tremendous. It's been a pleasure.
A guy on the Strive forum said to me the other day, why do you always talk about sex all the time? Now I know it's because I'm a horny dude.
That's right. Yeah, you're a sexual dude, and own that stuff.
I'm owning that horniness.
Yeah, do it.
Rosalyn, I really enjoyed it.
Makes you more alive. Yeah, absolutely. This was a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.